Welcome, St. Stephen's. If you're new or visiting, my name's Eric. I'm one of us on the preaching roster, and today is my day. Lucky me. Now, usually when I preach, I try to think of a story or an analogy to give you what I have to say to hang on. But with this sermon, I struggled to come up with anything. Who can remember bacon and eggs? Yeah. Right. Who can remember what it meant? Hey, there we go. We had someone at the early service too. But yeah, like I said, with this sermon, I was struggling to think of something. The crazy man in his bomb shelter? No, that doesn't work. The religious guy next door hoarding food and water for the end of the world? No, that didn't work either. So I'm going for a more personal of a story. As some of you know or may have figured out, I'm not from New Zealand. And I like to play a game with people where I get them to try and work out where I'm from. It's good fun. I get all sorts of answers. I've had Canadian, I've had American, I've had British, I've even had Irish by someone from Ireland, no less. Eventually, if they haven't guessed correctly, I let them know that I'm from Los Angeles, which then leads to the question, what brought you here? To which I reply, my parents. You see, my dad grew up in a sailing family. Usually sailing to Catalina off the coast of Los Angeles, where there's a cove named after my grandpa. It's called Big Geiger Cove. Between this and reading about sailing in the old days, my dad, ever since he was probably Israel's age, wanted to go for a cruise through the South Pacific on his way to find somewhere else outside the USA to live. So, as you do, he built a boat. And we sailed here on it. And that's where we went. It took us 3 years. So, like Noah's son, I grew up with a dad who built a boat to escape for a better life. So there you go. Nathaniel has farm stories, I have boating stories. But enough of me, onto the text. The passage opens up with God's assessment of the world at the time. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on earth, and his heart was filled with pain. Genesis 6:5 and 6. Sounds like he could be talking about today. After all, how many people are there in New Zealand? How many of them claim to be Christian? I came across an article on the Herald's website the other day, which allowed you to zoom in on various areas around New Zealand and see the religious makeup of it. Richmond is pretty good. They're at about 50% saying that they're Christian. Nelson's not as high, but it's still in the mid-40s. But the question is, of all these people, how many are actually Christian? How many just tick the box and then go about their lives without God as part of it? I'm reminded of the passage in Matthew 7, where we read, "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" As Nathaniel said last week, there's two teams. There's those that are for God and those that are against God. We need to choose the right team and then make sure that we're on the team. So back to the text. Sin has run rampant. Everyone has forgotten about God and turned their own way. And it's not just something as mild as they're not going to church. No, they're in active rebellion against God. It's almost like they took the 10 Commandments and said, right, we're not doing those. We're going to do everything else. You have something that I want. I'm going to take it. And I will kill you if I have to get it. Your spouse looks nice. I'll get them to leave you for me. Who cares about a little sexual perversion on the side? They were descending into total depravity. God had to do something. So the Lord said, "I will wipe out mankind, who I have created, from the face of the earth, men and animals, and creatures that move along the ground, and the birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them." Verse 7. It sounds pretty extreme, but sin is a big problem. It corrupts us. It'll eventually destroy us and those around us. But hang on, destroy the earth and everything in it? That doesn't sound like a very loving God. Where's the compassionate God, full of grace that we read about in Psalm 51? Or Jesus, meek and mild, that we see in the New Testament? R.C. Sproul, in his book, The Holiest of God, gives an example of how we can easily get comfortable with our sin. He tells the story of a class he taught one year. At the start of this year, he made it plain to the class when various assignments were due and said, if you don't get your assignment due in on that day, immediate F, fail. The students indicated that they understood. The first deadline came around. 225 students dutifully handed in their assignments. 25 did not. They stood before him trembling in fear, pleading, please give us an extension. We haven't made the transition to college very well. We'll have it in on time next time. He relented, but warned them, don't do it again. The next due date rolled around. 200 students turned in their assignments, 50 didn't. They stood before him, sorry, but not fearful. Please give us an extension. It's midterm. All the other assignments are in at the same time. He just got overwhelmed. Again, he relented, but made it clear, no more extensions. This is the absolute last one. The class acknowledged that they understood and praised him for his generosity and grace. Well, the next due date rolled around, and 150 students handed in their assignments, and 100 waltzed in without a care. Where are your assignments? Oh, don't worry, Prof. We'll have them for you in a couple days. So he pulled out his grade book. Smith, do you have your assignment? No, sir. F. Johnson, do you have your assignment? No. F. The students howled in rage, saying how unfair this was. He looked at one of the students. Mahoney, you think this is unfair? Yes, he said sulkily. I see it's justice you want. I see you handed in your paper late last time. I'll give you an F for that one as well, if you want. The student had no recourse. The students had quickly taken his grace for granted, so when they faced justice, they were shocked by it. We too can fall into the same trap. We forget that we are living under God's grace. What's supposed to happen when you sin? You die. The wages for sin are death, Romans 6:23. We should be rightly struck dead at the first sin. Because we don't see immediate punishment, we get complacent. And then when we see people punished, it doesn't feel right. We forget that we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We think we can manage it or work around it. Don't be deceived. It will destroy you. Put it to death, Colossians 3:5. God has to judge and condemn if he is to be a just God. Amongst this environment, God chose Noah to build an ark. But why Noah? Was it because he was a good person? No, we read earlier that all were evil all the time. Was it something else? Was it because he was a good boat builder? Or because God just had to have him on his team? No. Noah found favor in the eyes of God. He was a righteous man, blameless among his people, and he walked with God. Chapter 6, verses 8 and 9. Noah was chosen through grace, and by this he was made righteous. God could have just as easily chosen Noah's neighbor. But Noah was chosen, and like the Israelite, was chosen for a purpose. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and cut it with pitch, inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Make a roof for it and finish the ark within 18 inches of the top. Put a door on the side and make upper, lower, and middle decks. Let's take a look at the ark. In metric, it's 138 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 14 meters high. There's a few replicas around the world. That one's in Japan. It's pretty big looking, but to give you a better idea of how big it is, it's the length of the Mitre 10 here in Nelson, half the width, and about as high. So next time you're in there, have a look around and see how massive the ark was. Hi. But notice that God didn't just make the ark and give it to Noah. He had Noah build it. Why? To give him time to tell others what's going to happen, which would have been easy. It would have been a real conversation starter. Picture the following. One of Noah's neighbors comes over to see what Noah has been doing. We'll call him Bob. Bob. Noah, that's a big house you're building there. Noah, it's not a house, it's a boat. A boat? Why on earth are you building a boat? We're nowhere near the sea, and that won't fit in the lake. And besides, how are you going to move it? The water will come to the boat. A flood is coming, one that will cover the whole earth and wipe out all life on the land. God is going to wash away all the evil and start again with the families and animals on this boat. You can come with us and be part of God's plan. Are you going crazy? Sadly, we know from the passage that no one took up Noah's offer. In chapter 7, verse 7, we read that Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. There's no mention of anyone else. Once Noah has gone in, God's judgment comes down, and the earth is destroyed by a flood. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished: birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarmed over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in it died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out: men and animals and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds of the air were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him on the ark. But God remembered Noah and the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Noah and his family were left adrift in the flood waters, but God was still with them. So what are we to get out of this passage? Well, we first need to see where we are by taking an honest look at ourselves. We read in Ephesians 2, "As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of the world, of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our sinful nature and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature objects of wrath. We are no different to those that God destroyed in the flood. We commit sins of commission, things that we do, and sins of omissions, things that we don't do that we should. We are outside the ark. We are in the path of the coming judgment, waiting for the rain to fall. And it will fall. Judgment is promised in the New Testament. In Romans 2, we read that you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. For God will give to each person according to what he has done." What should we do then? Where should we go to escape this coming wrath? Where, like Noah, can we find grace? Noah may have had the ark, but we have something better. His name is Jesus. The answer is always Jesus. The ark is a type of Jesus. In this story, it points us to him. The ark was the means of salvation from the flood, and likewise, Jesus is our means of salvation today. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, Romans 10:13. We need to make sure that we don't miss the boat. But we have a responsibility to make sure others don't miss the boat either. Remember, Noah spent the years he was building the ark preaching to those around him, 2 Peter 2. telling them about this just and loving God, this God who must judge sin, but also wants to save all from sin, 1 Timothy 2. Noah was obedient to his calling. And we need to have a sense of urgency about it, because time is running out. What happens in verse 16? The Lord shut him in. When time ran out, God himself cuts off the means for salvation, and all who are outside are left outside. Picture Noah in his position. He's gone into the ark. It's dark. There's the noises of the animals around him as they settle down into their spots. He spent time building the ark, telling people about God, warning of the judgment that's to come. But no one listened. They all thought he was crazy and foolish. Maybe he even thinks that himself. Then he hears the first few drops of the rainfall. He begins to think of his friends, families, neighbors outside. His heart breaks for them, longing that they're in the ark with him. The rain gets harder and harder. Outside, the water starts to puddle and pool. The people outside begin to realize that Noah was right, and they run to the ark. But it's too late. The door has been closed, the way for salvation cut off. Noah hears them outside, but he can't help. Like the parable of Lazarus and the rich man in Luke 16, the chasm, as it were, is too wide. If Noah opens the door, all are lost. And even if he could, it would be pointless. All of those people have already shown that they don't care about God. They only care for their self-preservation. The door was shut and remained shut. They had made their choice, and they showed it by their action. It's no different from today. People show their actions, show by their actions their choice about Jesus. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating, drinking, marrying, and being given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. Then the flood came and destroyed them all. Luke 17. This is not what God wanted. His desire is for all to be saved, but sin cannot go unpunished. Like those in Noah's day, you and I are living in a period of grace. Just because we don't see judgment on sin doesn't mean it's not coming. But like Noah, we too have an ark. His name is Jesus, and all are welcome to come to his safety and salvation. But like the ark, one day the door will be shut. Don't miss the boat. And let's make sure that no one else misses the boat either. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for its brutal honesty. We thank you for what we can learn from it. Lord God, help us to not just wander through life, but help us live it for you and tell others about you before it's too late. Amen.